So, what makes someone like Elon Musk tick? Is it just raw genius, pure ambition, or is there something else, something deeper, something forged in pain? Today, we're going to dig into the origin story of one of the most consequential and controversial figures of our time to really understand the forces that shaped him.
He basically asked that question himself on national television. And in a lot of ways, his entire life story is the answer. So, to really get the guy who's sending rockets to Mars, we have to go back, way back, to the boy who was just trying to survive.
And that fight for survival, it all started here in South Africa during the 1980s. And look, this wasn't just some picturesque backdrop. This was an environment where violence was just normal. I mean, we're talking about things like machine gun attacks and knife killings being commonplace. It's the kind of place that teaches you from a very young age that the world is a dangerous, unsafe place. And nothing captures that brutal reality better than this thing called Veld School. Just try to imagine this. You're 12 years old, and you get sent off to what Musk himself calls a paramilitary Lord of the Flies. You're given almost no food, and according to his brother Kimball, bullying was basically encouraged. It was a virtue. You were supposed to fight other kids for scraps. For a kid like Elon, who was small and kind of geeky, it was an absolute nightmare. He got beaten up constantly and lost 10 pounds. And that brutality didn't just stay out in the wilderness. It followed him right back to school. For most of us, the playground is for monkey bars and games, right? Well, for young Elon, it was a place of pure terror. He was bullied all the time, but one time it was just horrific. He was kicked in the head, literally thrown down a flight of concrete stairs, and beaten so badly that when his brother found him, he didn't even recognize his face. He ended up in the hospital for a full week.
And this is so important to understand. We're not talking about a few childhood scuffles here. This was deep, legitimate trauma. The kind of physical violence that leaves a permanent psychological scar. A scar that, by all accounts, has stayed with him forever.
But you know what? As terrible as all that physical violence was, the psychological damage he was getting at home, mostly from his father, Errol, might have been even worse. And yeah, this is where the story takes a really dark turn. Okay, just look at this. It's a total disconnect from reality. So Elon gets out of the hospital, right? And you'd expect his dad to comfort him. But no, according to both Elon and his brother, Errol actually sided with the bullies. He apparently stood over his injured son and just screamed at him for an hour, calling him an idiot, calling him worthless. Elon himself described it as straight-up mental torture. And that kind of torture, it leaves marks. People who are close to Musk talk about how his moods can just nosedive into what they call demon mode, this dark, cold, callous state. And it sounds like a direct echo of the Jekyll and Hyde personality he said his own father had. It's almost as if that pain created this deep-seated aversion to ever just being happy or content. His first wife, Justine, had this really incredible insight into it all. She said that to survive a childhood like his, you basically have to shut yourself down emotionally. You build these massive walls. You learn to turn off fear. But, and this is the key part, when you turn off fear, maybe you have to turn off other things too. Things like joy, or even empathy. And that just perfectly explains how he developed this crazy high tolerance for pain and risk, right? He just turned the volume down on all his emotions. So, you're a kid in this situation. What do you do? How do you survive? Well, you escape. And at first, it wasn't a physical escape. He escaped into the one place that was truly his, the one place he could control, his own mind. Books, computers, sci-fi, these became his safe haven from a really, really harsh world. And his intellectual journey kind of started the way it does for a lot of smart, angsty teens, with a full-blown existential crisis. He got into heavy philosophy like Nietzsche, which probably didn't help. But then he discovered science fiction. Isaac Asimov's Foundation series gave him this new sense of mission. But the real game changer was The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. That's when he had this epiphany. It's not about finding the answer. The whole point is to expand our consciousness so we can start asking better, bigger questions. And pretty quickly, this mental escape started becoming very real, very practical. I mean, he wasn't just reading about cool tech, he was building it. At just 13 years old, he taught himself how to code and made his own video game called Blastar. And get this, he sold the source code to a magazine for $500. That right there, that's the first little flicker of the relentless entrepreneur he would become. But, escaping into your own head can only get you so far. By the time he was 17, Musk knew he had to make a real escape, a physical one.
He had to get away from his father, and he had to get out of South Africa if he was ever going to build the future he was dreaming up. And so, he just did it, all by himself. At 17, right before he turned 18, he managed to get a Canadian passport, bought a one-way ticket, and just left. I mean, can you imagine? It was a total clean break from everything he'd ever known, just this huge leap of faith into the unknown. And what were his father's parting words? Was it, "Good luck, son"? Nope. It was this: "You'll be back in a few months. You'll never be successful." Just, wow. You can just imagine how words like that would become pure rocket fuel for a kid determined to prove him wrong. Now, his first few years in North America were not glamorous at all. He was doing seriously grueling manual labor, stuff like cleaning out the boilers in a lumber mill for $18 an hour. But he was in the right place at the right time. The dot-com wave was building, and he was dead set on riding it. So he and his brother Kimball started their first company, Zip2. And when I say the grind was insane, I mean it. This was no cushy startup with free snacks. They were literally sleeping in their tiny office, showering at the local YMCA, living off Jack in the Box, and just coding 24/7. The pressure was so intense they'd apparently get into actual fistfights right there on the office floor. It was the absolute definition of hardcore. And after 4 years of that just relentless, punishing grind, it paid off. Big time. Compaq Computer came in and bought Zip2 for $307 million cash. Elon's personal cut from that deal? $22 million. At just 27 years old, the kid who ran away from home with basically nothing in his pockets was now a multimillionaire. And this quote just perfectly captures the whiplash he must have felt. He went out and bought himself a $1 million McLaren F1 supercar. And when it was delivered, he just seemed completely floored, almost in disbelief at how fast and how radically his whole life had just changed. And that brings us right back to where we started. It all comes full circle. His biographer points out that whenever Musk feels attacked or threatened, it triggers that same horror he felt being bullied on the playground. But now, with all this money and all this power, he basically gets to own the playground. Which leaves us with one last big question. When the kid who was terrorized on the playground finally gets to run it, what kind of rules does he make?